Learn from my mistakes. Today I'll be sharing 7 tips that help me freehand with confidence. I kept looking at these designer pieces and I wanted to recreate them, but I was too scared. Okay, our first tip is to start from your inspiration. So when I started knitting and crocheting, I started by using patterns. Within crochet, I loved Namaste and Crochet. The patterns she made were most similar to my personal style. So after I tried a couple of her patterns, I started to put a lot of that information in my mental library to use for later. In terms of what I make now, I find a lot of inspiration from my favorite designers. My 2 top are Cult Gaia and Christopher Esper. When I scroll, I try to break down each piece into its simpler components. This is a Christopher Esper inspired top that I recreated recently. This top on the website is hundreds of dollars. It was one of my absolute top dream shirts. The inspiration is actually quite simple. It's just a simple t-shirt. So I went on Etsy looking for this type of hardware and I found somebody selling it in the UK. So I already had this t-shirt pattern that I knit once. I knew that the pattern was worked top down. So once I got here, I thought it would actually be really easy to split the front, the right and the left side, and then just create this kind of keyhole where I could sew in the hardware. Try to find a place that you can start. When you buy a pattern, you don't necessarily have to make the whole thing, right? Take what you need, leave what you don't need, and go from there. The next tip is very pointed towards me personally. Me personally and me recently. You are making for a 3D body, not a 2D body. So fortunately, a lot of the time when we're making, we can try the piece on as we go. But for example, this top, my first version of this top was way too short. Because every time I was knitting and looking at it in a 2D, I thought, the length, we have the length, it looks good, it's probably gonna fit. But when you put it on, obviously the shoulder, that gives it a lot more bulk. I had to rework this a couple of times to get really the length that I was looking for. Remember that fabric behaves differently when it's on your body. As you design your own garments, you'll be able to gain more experience on how your body is shaped. Usually when you're following a pattern, it's just all in there as a recipe. I think it's important to start with gaining a base of knowledge by trying out patterns, top patterns, sweater patterns, dresses, and kind of see what really works for you. Tip number 3 is patience. Always going to take longer than you think. Even more so when you're freehanding something, because I personally, I don't factor in the amount of time it takes for me to rip back and figure something out. One of my first projects of this year was this Parker Zinn inspired mini dress. So this is funny. Actually, the goal here was to make a full floor length ball gown. But as you can see, every single row increases the size. So by the end, look how big this bottom is. So in the end, each row had hundreds and hundreds of stitches. And that is why I gave up and made a mini dress. Yeah, even this little t-shirt top took me several days. And then even more because I had to rework the length. Just remember, build in time for trial and error and just enjoy the process. Tip number 4, try it on constantly and don't get lazy with trying it on like me. Earlier this year, I made this is a pearl lined summer dress. Let me show you on. This is also a Cult Gaia recreation and I'm super proud with how this turned out. But as you can see, the way I knit this, it started with this triangle piece on the front and the back. And when I started, I thought I was increasing every other row. I was looking at the shape from the inspiration photo and I didn't even hold it up to myself if it would work. Eventually, after I finished the whole front and the back piece and connected in the round, I realized this was it was down here. It was way too thin. So then I had to rip back the whole thing, but then I realized I had to increase every single round. So for everything that you're freehanding, just try again and again to try it on as early as possible, especially when shaping is involved. Make sure you try it on constantly. And that really leads us to our next tip, which is rip back the moment that you feel something is off. There have been many times where I just keep moving forward thinking that it's not going to be a big deal. And almost every single time, I ended up ripping back to that original spot, which becomes a huge waste of time. This happens even when I'm following patterns. It happens when I'm freehanding. If you have this feeling that something is going wrong, you have the little thought in your head to ignore that feeling. Don't. Just rip it back. Think about it all as being just a learning process. Remember, if you're thinking about ripping back, that means you probably should. My next tip is start with simple construction. So I would say even this dress is extremely simple. It's pretty much a 2x2 rib. You do a triangle for the front and the back, you join and you just knit it right down into whatever length that you prefer. Or for example, that Christopher Esper recreation, it's just a t-shirt. Like a lot of you have followed a couple of garment patterns. Now we think about elevating that t-shirt into something a little bit more special. Recently, a project I finished was a 3-hour top. A lot of people ask me for a how-to or a tutorial on making this. Honestly, this is probably the easiest thing you can make. I just started with 2 identical rectangles. I seamed it a little at the shoulder. I cast on for the ribbing on the bottom, finished at the collar and the sleeve. Try to break down your ideas into as simple as possible. I think simplicity is very underrated, and when you do that, you kind of make a design a lot more approachable. Okay. So I'm gonna give you an example of simplicity. So this here, I didn't make this. This is one of, let me show you. This is the Cult Gaia Thera dress, which was my dream dress for many years. I actually found this on the Real for like probably 80-90% off. But I've recently just had the idea to see if I could recreate this dress in knit. It looks very complicated, but I think you can kind of break this down into rectangles of different shapes and sizes. Like essentially this piece, this and this piece is ultimately probably similar to a rectangle. We have rectangle, rectangle, rectangle. A lot of fashion, when you look at it in a context of knit and crochet, break down complex shapes into very simple ones and then start from there. Okay, that brings us to tip 7, which is consider giving yourself a creative limitation. I was in high school and we were writing essays. Within the constraint of that prompt is where your mind starts to expand, start to consider different ideas. So I was between 2 big projects, so I wanted to make something really quickly. So I set myself a constraint of making a 2-hour sweater, which eventually turned into a 3-hour crop top. I also wanted to use up some of the stash yarn that I had. A lot of it is not wool, it's probably a lot of cotton, acrylic. So in terms of the time constraint, that meant I was going to hold a bunch of strands of yarn together to make a thicker yarn so I could work it up way faster. And then I opted for a super simple construction. The rectangle. Try to give yourself a constraint. Maybe you want to recreate a designer piece, or you want to incorporate a piece of hardware or a piece of jewelry into a wearable and then see where your mind takes you from there. I tend to find that when I limit myself, it helps a lot with the overthinking. This top, did not think enough. Not enough overthinking, but actually I'm really happy with how this came out, and I've worn it a couple of times since I made it. Don't forget, tip number 1, start with your inspiration. Tip number 2, you're making for a 3D body, not a 2D one. Tip number 3, all of this stuff takes longer than you think. Hence, 2-hour top turned into a 3-hour top. Number 4, try it on constantly. Don't get lazy. Don't be like me. The moment you have the thought, should I rip it back? Do it. Just do it. Do it. Spare yourself the pain of doing it later. Start simple with the construction. Try to distill everything into simple shapes and start from there. Last tip, give yourself a prompt, a creative limitation, how your mind creates within a box. If you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us back for our next one. The next couple of projects I'm working on are for my Portugal vacation wardrobe that's coming up in a couple of months, so super excited. I love vacation clothes. I love like resort wear. It's gonna be good.